My name is Byron Johnson. It's a pleasure to welcome you here to what we're calling the launch event. I have the pleasure of being a co-principal investigator of the Global Flourishing Study, along with my close friend and colleague, Dr. Tyler Vanderwill, who you'll be hearing from in just a moment. I wanted to give you a little bit of history behind the Global Flourishing Study. The idea for the Global Flourishing Study actually happened about 6.5 years ago at a conference that was funded by the Templeton Foundation on flourishing at Harvard. And during that 3-day conference, Tyler and I had a chance to spend some time together. It was the first time we had met in person, although we had known each other for several years. And we kind of hatched this plot to do a global study, why not dream big, on flourishing that would be longitudinal. And we pitched the idea to the Templeton Foundation, who was at this meeting, and Kimon Sargent in particular was there. And he said, well, how would you carry that out? And I said, we would work with our friends at Gallup. Have you talked to them about this idea? We just had the idea. So a week later or so, we met in the room right behind this screen in the boardroom and pitched the idea to Gallup. Is it possible to do something like this? And I remember Rajesh, the chief methodologist who's with us today, said, we've been thinking about it. It's never been done. Give us some time to put together a plan. And they did, and they came back and said a couple of months later, we have good news and bad news. The good news is it can be done. The bad news is it's expensive. It's very expensive. So we spent 3 years raising funds, going to foundations, writing proposals, and the project was officially launched in the fall of 2021. That led to a year of pilot work, cognitive testing around the world, getting feedback from 150 different scholars and experts to come up with a survey that we would eventually field in 40 different languages around the world. The translation issue alone was such a heavy lift for us. We actually have a book coming out in a few weeks with Gallup on the translation work, and it is about 1,000 pages in length. So if you suffer from insomnia, I highly recommend this book to you. Today, we're so pleased that you're here in the room with us, and we're pleased that so many people of you are viewing this event online. It really is the culmination of a dream come true. Today, we're rolling out 36 papers in the Nature Springer portfolio of journals. We're not aware of something that's happened at this scale before. These papers are all online, and you will have in your packets, or you will be seeing shortly, a link so you can see all these wonderful papers that have come out, I guess, at 6 a.m. this morning. And Tyler and I want to give a special shout out to Stavrula Kusta, who is the special editor of the collection, and she's also the chief editor of Nature Human Behavior. So I know you're watching in the UK. Thank you, Stavrula, for all you've done to make this special event possible. And then I want to thank the partners, too. The Center for Open Science, who you'll be hearing from shortly, of course, Gallup, Tyler's wonderful team at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard, and my team at the Institute for Studies of Religion at Baylor. All total, we have 50 scholars that have been working kind of around the clock for the last year. And it's just been a privilege to work with them. We have one new partner I want to mention real quick. As of today, we have just launched a new institute at Baylor called the Institute for Global Human Flourishing. Thanks to the support of the administration, Linda Livingstone, the president, and Provost Nancy Brickhouse, who's here with me. Thank you, Nancy, for giving me another job. I really appreciate that, and I do mean that seriously. We're calling today a launch event because it is just the beginning of a dialogue and a discussion on what it means to flourish. We don't pretend that we have figured it out. We haven't. We want to understand flourishing, and we want to understand it with you. So we look forward to this ongoing dialogue that we launch today. And lastly, it wouldn't be possible if we hadn't had the funders to get us across the finish line. the John Templeton Foundation, the Templeton Religion Trust, the Templeton World Charity Foundation, the Fetzer Institute, the Paul Foster Family Foundation, the Wellbeing for Planet Earth Foundation, the Wellbeing Trust, and the David and Carol Myers Foundation. We couldn't have done it, obviously, without every one of them. So thank you to them. And now I'd like to ask Dr. Christopher Stewart, who's the Chief Grants Officer from the Templeton Religion Trust, to come up and offer a few comments before Dr. Tyler Vanderwilt takes the stage. Chris?
Thank you, Byron. Good morning. The Templeton Philanthropies are committed to expanding the possibilities for human progress in three respects. In short, more discovery, leading to more growth, and ultimately to more flourishing of individuals, communities, and whole societies. So we're honored to be in a position to partner with one another, with the other funders present here this morning, to support a research program as expansive and relevant as the Global Flourishing Study. We're also very grateful for the vision and tenacity of Byron at Baylor University, Tyler Vanderwilt at Harvard, the team at Gallup and Center for Open Science for their work, and of course, also the many researchers in the field responsible for collection data that gathered here this morning to learn about. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Tyler to come up here and to begin to walk us through it.
Well, it is my pleasure and honor to be able to present to you some of the initial results of Wave 1 of the Global Flourishing Study. The Global Flourishing Study is a study of over 200,000 individuals from 22 different countries and territory, representing about 2/3 of the world's population, with nationally representative sampling within each country and an intended 5 years of annual data collection with the same group of 200,000 individuals. We'd asked an extensive range of questions concerning well-being and its potential determinants. But in the flagship paper of the Nature Special Collection that was just released this morning, we focus on a composite flourishing index, looking at 6 key dimensions of flourishing: happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, close social relationships, and financial security. We've taken 2 questions in each of these 6 domains, drawn principally from the existing well-being literature, questions that are in widespread use and that have received some degree of empirical validation. Each of these questions is self-reported on a scale from 0 to 10. In one of our analyses, we look at how the means of these questions across individuals in each country vary. When we combine across these 6 dimensions of well-being, the results are perhaps not what one might have guessed. At the top, we find Indonesia reporting 8.1 out of 10 on this composite flourishing, followed then by Israel, Philippines, Mexico, and Poland. Most of the countries, in fact, self-report a mean around 7. In this list, numbers 9 through 20 are all between 6.8 and 7.2, and we probably shouldn't make too much of the differences between them, given differences in response patterns and translations and cultural interpretations. But there are some outliers. Turkey reported fairly low at 6.3, and Japan especially low at 5.9. On the other end of the spectrum, again, Indonesia, Israel, Philippines, Mexico, Poland, all report especially high, above 7.5. And I'll come back to what we are to make of this and how we are to interpret it. The US, fairly in the middle with 7.11. In addition to looking at these averages in each country, we also look at variation across demographic categories. We look at this both within country, but then we aggregate and pool across the 22 countries to look at global trends. Some of the trends that have emerged are that flourishing globally tends to increase with age in many specific countries and also on average. That is not the case everywhere. In Poland, in Tanzania, flourishing declines with age. Globally, men and women report relatively similar levels of flourishing, but there is variation across countries. In Japan, women report notably higher than men. In Brazil, it's the reverse. Men report notably higher flourishing than women. Replicating a great deal of prior work, we find that married individuals tend to report higher levels of flourishing than single individuals. But this, too, is not the universal pattern. In India, in Tanzania, single individuals report higher flourishing than married individuals. Perhaps unsurprisingly, those who are employed or self-employed report higher levels of flourishing than those who are unemployed. Likewise, those with higher levels of education tend to globally report higher levels of flourishing, but once again, that's not the case everywhere. In Hong Kong, in Australia, we find the reverse pattern. We do consistently find across countries that those with higher levels of religious service attendance and higher levels of other forms of community participation tend to report higher levels of flourishing. It is difficult to summarize a vast amount of work and research in just a few key points, but here are a handful of research highlights that we want to briefly mention. First, as noted earlier, young people seem to not be doing particularly well. Flourishing looks like it is increasing with age. Overall, when we aggregate across countries and in many specific countries, including Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Sweden, Germany, Mexico, the United States, the United Kingdom. This is in contrast with much earlier work focused mostly on life satisfaction and life evaluation, which had suggested more of a U-shaped pattern, with younger individuals and older individuals reporting higher levels of flourishing, and those in midlife, perhaps struggling with young children, aging parents, career challenges, reporting lower levels of flourishing or well-being. What seems to be the case is that over time, that left part of the U has been flattening. Young people are not doing as well as they used to be. I think this raises important policy questions with regard to how can we better support the well-being of youth. Second, different countries seem to be flourishing in different ways. While richer, developed countries tend to report higher levels of life evaluation, overall higher levels of financial security, it seems to be the reverse with meaning in life, with pro-social character, with relationships. Middle-income countries seem to be reporting higher levels on these other aspects of flourishing. With meaning in life, we actually find a negative correlation between GDP per capita and meaning in life. I think this raises important questions with regard to how can we carry out economic development in ways that don't compromise meaning, purpose, character, and relationships. Third, one of the most consistent results across countries and across outcomes is that participation in religious community is strongly associated with flourishing. Those who are attending services more than weekly report nearly a full point higher level of flourishing than those not attending at all. These are purely descriptive statistics, but in other analyses with the Global Flourishing Study data, we have assessed childhood experiences retrospectively, and childhood religious service attendance, after controlling for a host of other childhood factors, is likewise strongly associated with subsequent adult flourishing. We have wondered whether this association with religious service attendance is perhaps partly responsible for the lower levels of the more humanistic aspects of well-being, such as meaning, relationships, character, that we find in rich, developed countries. Have we perhaps been neglecting important spiritual pathways to flourishing? This, of course, is only a tiny fraction of what might be said with the Global Flourishing data and studies. More information is on the Nature Springer Special Collection on the Global Flourishing Study website, and the data is freely available through the Center for Open Science. A project of this magnitude is not possible without an extraordinary team and set of partners. So we are deeply grateful to Templeton Philanthropies, the Fetzer Institute, and all of our funders for support. Deeply grateful also to Gallup and all of the partners, the vendors, the individuals, and the study participants that made this data possible. We're grateful to the Nature, Springer, BMC, editors, and especially to Stavroula Costa for facilitating this special collection. And of course, very grateful to the Harvard and Baylor research teams for their extraordinary hard work, and especially to Alex Fogelman and Tim Lomas for their project management, and to Noah Paget and the whole coding team for their incredible analytic work. And finally, I am personally grateful to Byron Johnson. His partnership, support, leadership, and friendship have been an important part of my own flourishing. Thank you all. And with that, I would like to call up Dr. Matt Lee, our moderator, and our distinguished panelists for further discussion of these Wave 1 results.
Well, let's see. It looks like we have maybe 30 minutes. I was expecting 36, and we got 30, and that's not bad, given how these things go. Thank you all for joining us. As Tyler mentioned, my name is Matthew Lee. I'm a professor at Baylor and a research associate at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard. I'd like to introduce our speakers. Of course, you've heard from Tyler, a professor and director of the Human Flourishing Program and co-director of the Initiative on Health, Spirituality, and Religion at Harvard University. Moitri Sinha is CEO and founder of Cities Rise, and Tim Arrington is Senior Director of Research for the Center for Open Science. So thank you all for joining us today, and we'll dive right into the questions. This one's for Tim. Tyler powerfully set the stage for this conversation with these findings. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Global Flourishing Study is that the full data set is being made openly available, a rare move for research of this scale, and one that reflects the Center for Open Science's core mission. Why is that level of openness so important, and what kind of impact do you hope it will have across disciplines and sectors?
Thank you for that question. And I think it's almost self-evident, right? There's a lot of investment that went into making it possible in the work that has and is still ongoing in this project. And that, I think, really means the value of rigor and transparency, openness, and reuse has got to be at the forefront of this project. And that's a key piece of what's happening here, right? The data is openly available to allow other researchers to dig into this data, not just what's going to be produced going forward, but what has already been produced. And why is that important? It's important because it really means that the credibility and trustworthiness of the data we're producing and consuming, you can have confidence in that. And so in terms of what we hope this is, I think this is a great case example of what we think can occur for the Center for Open Science's point of view across disciplines, across sectors, right? A way to really help improve the ability of data being collected and evidence that we interpret and use, right? Really meaning and having that biggest impact on people's lives.
So there's a lot of national and even international debate about the replication crisis in science, and there's a very well-known study of well-being, I won't mention it by name, but currently being called into question as a financial empire has been built around it, and people are saying, wait a minute, we don't know if this is a real set of findings because they've never released the data in 20 years. And so what does it mean in terms of addressing the replication crisis and the credibility of science, that not only are the data available, but all of the analytic code that everyone uses available, and that we pre-register our findings?
That's a great question. So a key piece, I think, in terms of trustworthiness and credibility to avoid issues that you were just raising is to remind ourselves it's not the paper that you have trust in, or even the researchers, even though we should trust our researchers. It's the process. The process of science is what we trust. And so making sure that we are being very clear and honest with ourselves means that we as a society can trust science because of the process of science. It's holding itself accountable to these key features, right? Which is I am going to share what I'm doing. I'm going to tell you my intentions. I'll pre-commit to my research designs and research questions in advance, so pre-registration. And that means we can have more confidence in the outcomes because of the process that was followed through.
I just want to highlight that word process. And I remember asking my kids, they've had several science classes growing up, what is science? And they struggled to define it. And I said, it's a process. And that's what is distinct about science, is the nature of the process. So thank you for highlighting that. Moitri, the Global Flourishing Study offers a rare lens into what well-being looks like across cultures and contexts. From your own experience with Cities Rise, how do you see mental health and flourishing intersecting in different local communities around the world?
Thank you, Matt. We've been very fortunate to work with young people directly in many, many different cultures and contexts, along with researchers, entrepreneurs, policymakers. And I think out of the last 8 years of that transdisciplinary science and research in many, many places, I think what has emerged is that when we think of mental health, when we start thinking it from an illness lens, it becomes a deficit issue. But when we start thinking of health creation, then you start seeing the parallels between flourishing and mental health. And fundamentally, it comes to that every young person, every human being has the innate capacity to find their own selves, understand that they're a part of something bigger, and find meaning, belonging, purpose, everything that Haldor was just talking about. And I think these are all different aspirational states, mental health and well-being, think about flourishing, and some of the work that we've been doing in partnership with World Charity Foundation with researchers as part of Human Flourishing and looking very bottom up. What is it that we are seeing in different cultures and contexts? That we are seeing that these things are experienced, expressed in very different ways, but there is a plurivocality about it. But when you start constructing a knowledge architecture and you start looking at the conceptual elements, and especially the qualities that define well-being or flourishing, these are not that disconnected. They are fundamentally very connected, especially something that we seem to have forgotten, and which it seems that is emerging from the learnings, that there is this inner collective linkage, that this inner spiritual dimension within human beings that is part of this vast, infinite, connective part. So that inner collective is a foundational element. And when you start looking at the science from that perspective, and you start looking at practices and what's happening in the actual world, then you start being able to relate these different ways of looking at human beings and whatever you want to call it, well-being, flourishing.
Yeah, thank you. And so I really like this word that you use, knowledge architecture. And so we talked a little bit last night about the kind of inner capacities, and then how people are being invited to serve others and express those inner capacities. And so given what you've heard in some of the findings that Tyler shared about this potential strengths in middle income countries and the possibility of religious service attendance and other variables impacting flourishing, how does that align with what you're seeing with young people in light of this knowledge architecture you mentioned?
Well, some of these might be a little bit of hypothesis at this point, but I think based on some of the things that we've seen, that there are very important accelerators of the transcendent in human beings. The process from going from a healthy sense of self to understanding that we are part of something bigger. Those are things like, linked to nature, relationships, service. All of these are different accelerators of that transcendent within us, individually and collectively. And so what's happening in the world right now, we've taken a lot of that away from young people, growing up in intergenerational communities, growing up with real relationships, nature, arts. So it's not that surprising that as you look at any particular country, and you start relating different indices, whether it's the GDP or something else, that you might start not seeing, you may not see correlations in certain places, or you might. So I think it's going to be really interesting to go deeper into what we are seeing and start looking at the fundamental science and the mechanisms. And I think we need to stop limiting science to the extent that human knowledge is and really start turning towards, I think, what we are seeing as part of some of the science and research through the recent work on flourishing. A lot of the ancient wisdom, a lot of the indigenous wisdom, which had a much more integrated way of looking at human beings and society, I think there is a way to have science leapfrog there as opposed to be much more incremental.
I think in some ways the Global Flourishing Study is, and these first findings are inviting us to reconnect with the essentials that you're describing. And remember that relationships that are also intergenerational are more emphasized in some places than others. And so we've got a fresh set of hypotheses coming out of what you're sharing. Thank you. Tyler, what's your vision for how researchers, journalists, educators, and policymakers might engage with these data, and what ripple effects do you hope it would spark?
So I think the vision and hope for the Global Flourishing Study is that it would make flourishing the focus of our personal pursuits and of policy. With regard to researchers, we hope you'll access the data, make use of it. We're coming at this with our own set of perspectives and priorities, but we want people around the world to make use of it and to share their own insights into flourishing. With regard to journalists, please do report these results. Discuss the importance of investing in the well-being of youth and incoming generations, the importance of recommitting to matters of relationships, of meaning, of character, the potential for spiritual pathways to flourishing. With regard to educators and policymakers, again, our hope is that flourishing would be the center of policy and of measurement. I truly believe that what we measure shapes what we discuss, what we study, what we know, what we aim for, and the policies put in place to achieve those aims. So our hope, our ambition, once again, is that flourishing would become the center of personal pursuit and policy.
Well, thank you, Tyler. So normally I would expect when I ask a question that complicated, somebody would miss educators or policymakers. I would have a follow-up, but you hit all of it right off the bat. So we've gained back some of the time that we lost. And I thank you for that. When you think about what different countries are sort of known for in terms of what they pursue, their strengths, whether it's economic development or protection of the environment or some aspect of flourishing, how can all of these different focal concerns of different countries be integrated and balanced, or maybe harmonized would be the better way to think about it? So you said, let's privilege flourishing, and what about the other things, and how are those means to an end, and this is the ultimate end?
So our working definition of flourishing is living in a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good, including the context, communities, and environments in which they live. So to my mind, flourishing is all-encompassing, but then there are difficult questions with regard to what is to be prioritized and what are the strengths and the areas of growth of different countries. At the end of the flagship paper, which you all have a copy of, we do have a table where we report, based on the numerical data, what are the relative strengths and areas of growth in each country. And I think that is useful material for reflection. But I do think each country, each culture will have its own priorities, and it's important to reflect on those. I think each country should, in fact, begin carrying out its own flourishing data collection based on those culturally specific priorities. We've got a lot of work to do still to unpack the cultural nuances within each country, and Tim Lomas will be leading a special collection where we take a different look at the data, where we look across all the different outcomes, but only within a given country. And I think those papers, those reflections which are coming out from researchers located in each of the 22 countries will provide yet further insight.
Well, Tyler, I really like how you framed that, and it goes back to what Byron was inviting at the beginning. This is an invitation to dialogue. So we have these wonderful findings. We're just beginning to explore them. Of course, the real payoff comes once we have the multiple waves and we can start to study changes over time. In the meantime, as we think about well, I'll turn to Tim now. So given what a massive, complicated, multi-year, multi-dimensional data set this is, what are some of the biggest challenges and breakthroughs in ensuring that the Global Flourishing Study met the standards of transparency and reproducibility, and how will that be moving forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one thing is just, you heard early on, right? Gallup translated the survey into many languages for many reasons. That's actually very helpful for a study like this, right? As a researcher in different countries, just like Tyler was saying, to make these resources more accessible as to the degree that's possible. So that's, a big kudos to Gallup for doing that. I think that helps a lot. Also, the process of how the data is available, this concept of you have to pre-register before you have it, that maintains the credibility, particularly because it's longitudinal data. But it also means that it is open. It's open for any researcher in any context, any country. So at the Center for Open Science, obviously we've worked close with researchers at Harvard and Baylor. We've just as well worked close with researchers all over the place, having different questions. And we anticipate that to grow. In fact, I imagine this event will have our inbox get filled really fast. And that is an amazing thing. It's also a challenge for us because that means the readiness of researchers in different countries, different backgrounds, different support systems. We have to prepare ourselves to be able to make sure that we can hold that standard, but really it's also an opportunity to grow, right? To say open science, the process of science, that's global as well. That's not unique to just this country, just the United States, just these researchers. So I think that's been our challenge in terms of making sure that we can be prepared to do that. But that's also, to me, a huge opportunity and a big breakthrough, is this is going to give us collectively, not COS, us collectively, more insights into how do we help really let open science flourish globally as well.
As I've gotten to better understand both open science and the center and how it works, I'm reminded of how very different that was from my graduate training. This was just not part of it. And so there's been a learning curve for me, and I know many of the researchers. And so we're really, I guess, collectively trying to re-socialize scientists into the way I think about it, and maybe this is fair or not, you can tell me, but it's a more generous way of doing science. It's not my data for my advocacy and my proprietary use and potential profit, but it's the spirit of sharing and giving. Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair. I have young kids, to echo what you had, and they're learning the research process, and it's worth us as scientists going back and reminding ourselves what we were taught as well, and not in a mean way. I say that in a very generous way, which is sharing, being transparent, pursuit of discovery, right? Like, this is going to advance things a lot farther than it will if we do it by ourselves. And I think this is a project that's a great example of that. You have seen lots of great results by two amazing research groups. They opened the data so you can have even more amazing results by more research groups. And that's going to advance this a lot farther than it will by doing it by a single individual or a single group.
Yeah, and I remember reading an article and thinking, well, what did they actually do? You can't know. So we put the analytical code out there for everyone, so you can know exactly what we did, and you can change it and maybe improve it in some ways. And that's the process of generous improvement. Might not be a bad way to start defining science. Moitri, so this is a memory test. Tyler passed his. I want to see if you can. Yours is a lot longer here, so I'll help out. Cities Rise is known for applying systems thinking to human development issues. What are you learning from the work you're doing on human flourishing in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa? And how can scientific findings from this scale of research inform real-world implementation, especially in the complex field of human flourishing and holistic development of young people? Let me repeat part of that again.
I think, so one of the things that we've been learning a lot from the work on human flourishing, especially in the two regions that we've been focusing on right now, South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, I think what's been coming out of that, we refer to the knowledge architecture, and that was motivated from the perspective of that we were hearing very, very different things when we were asking the question of what does it mean to be human, what does it mean to flourish. But within that, there are centrality of certain core concepts which are universal, which transcends cultures or contexts. But then a lot of these are very locally contextual. So starting to create a knowledge architecture, that's more a way of organizing the field as opposed to it's not a prescriptive way of looking at anything. That has been immensely helpful to start seeing that how we can bring a little bit more of a systemic lens. And as we started combining that with the bottom-up learnings and insights, the very experiential base of working with young people, because flourishing, it's a very personalized concept as well. So you think of personalized medicine, and we cannot just take a one-size-fits-all approach. So we have to free up human beings, we have to free up communities to explore and find, their own inner being and live from that center. And so we've been distilling the learnings from, discipline, science, what is emerging, from the different sources of ancient indigenous wisdom, and this very experiential learning. And out of that, we have landed into what we call the 3 very simple core capacities of any young person that needs to be supported, and for any human being for that matter. And those 3 capacities are the capacities for inner cultivation, the relational capacity, and the capacity for engaged action. And we've also been scientifically modeling this in terms of the human journey and those 3 dimensions. So I feel that in order to take a more of a systems approach where you can start connecting all this, you want to retain the diversity of different ways of knowing and doing things. But within that, you need simplification because we've made everything so complicated. And so this allows us a way to start studying, what are those fundamental human capacities within human beings and collectives that we must commit to. And we must, through policy, practice, and with a sense of urgency, bring that to young people and communities across the world. And I think that will start linking, to the different types of data and outcomes and other things that we are seeing across the countries. So I feel that that's the type of architecture that we are working on to see how what we were referring to, so that any aspirational qualities, whether it's human agency, human flourishing, well-being, all of these can be supported, but not in such a fragmented way by different funders and different sectors, but underpinning that, sort of not forgetting what the simple aspects of being human is. So I think that's the systemic lens that we are trying to bring in as quickly as we can.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I know some of the work that you've been leading was supported by the Templeton World Charity Foundation, sort of landscaping what's happening with flourishing in these regions. Is there a group or an example that you can point to that seems to embody these 3 capacities very well from your mapping of the landscape? A place that seems to be doing it that we might further lean into and better understand?
I think, some of the places, and it's so different and diverse, but like in certain, I'll mention a certain part of India, Bengal, where I'm originally from. And there are certain traditions around, whether it's the lyric traditions, different ways of building communities, different ways of connecting through music and other forms, that those are certain examples of how different communities, are activating different pathways or mechanisms, if you will, for flourishing. And it starts becoming a center through which one interacts and develops that. And it can be very different in different places, even the concepts of Ubuntu and other things that are still being practiced in different ways in different parts of, East Africa and other places. So it's very, very different in different parts, but I think we are seeing that there are these multifaceted components, and there is a certain traditions and certain inner collective relational type of concepts that are practiced in many, many different ways.
Yeah, and it's food for thought in terms of we live in this moment of change where traditions are sort of giving way, and the question is, what are they giving way to? And so maybe some of these areas that you've identified that are sort of benefiting from the way that traditions organize human behavior, and that's the systems perspective that you're bringing to it. Maybe that there's an opportunity for us to better understand what's happening there. Great, thank you. Tyler, as a long-term study, the Global Flourishing Study offers a unique window into how flourishing changes over time. What patterns or early insights are most surprising or promising to you?
Yeah, so, I mean, some of the research really is just a replication and confirmation of prior work that GDP is negatively associated with meaning in life. We in fact knew previously from earlier research. But what was surprising to me was to find similar patterns as well with relationship satisfaction, with pro-social character, to the extent that those factors led many of the middle-income countries to score highest overall on composite self-reported flourishing. And so again, I think that leads to really important questions with regard to how to carry out economic development in ways that don't compromise meaning, purpose, relationships, and character. The economic development is essential, and we see that in the data. But how do we do this in ways that preserve these other central aspects of flourishing, of life, of what it means to be human? In terms of what I find perhaps most promising, and this may be more controversial in the present context, but I mean, I do think those consistent patterns in the Global Flourishing Study data and in a lot of prior research with regard to the spiritual pathways, with regard to religious community participation in particular, may be an important means to sustain meaning, to sustain character, to sustain relationships in the context of economic development, and not allow ourselves to be pulled too far towards making economic growth and financial security the priority over everything. It is important, but we need to look at these other aspects of flourishing. Flourishing includes all aspects of life. So policy implications there, I think, are a bit more complex. People usually don't make religious commitments on the basis of empirical statistical data analyses. But I mean, I think one might see the research as, in some sense, an invitation for those who do already positively identify with a particular religious tradition, but aren't participating in community life. And that constitutes a large portion, at least, of Western populations. Perhaps the research results are an invitation back into religious community life. It's clear that it's important for various aspects of flourishing and perhaps for much else as well.
And Tyler, outside of the Global Flourishing Study, some of your other research has looked at some other outcomes that religious service attendance is associated with. Would you like to share a few other kind of beyond the domains of flourishing here, but there's other outcomes that are also positively affected by religious service attendance?
So in our prior research on this topic and that of many other researchers around the world, we've found that participation in religious community, even after control for a host of other variables, is associated over time with lower rates of all-cause mortality by about 30%, lower rates of depression by about 20 to 30%, five-fold reductions in suicide, greater levels of meaning, of social connectedness, of marital stability, of civic participation, of charitable giving. Not all outcomes, associations with cardiovascular health seem unclear. Those with weight, perhaps those church potlucks, have contributed to some weight gain. Not huge associations with anxiety, unlike depression and suicide. So the picture is complex, but religious participation does seem to affect really a host of well-being outcomes in some of the most rigorous studies. Many of those studies have previously been restricted to Western contexts. And so I think one of the wonderful things about the Global Flourishing Study is to extend those insights on religious community, but on a host of other important pathways, such as family and work and education, to a more global setting. And we're very excited as to what we'll learn as we continue to collect each wave of data and to be able to get these insights, not just within the West, but globally, to see what is universal and to see what's culturally specific. So while we've learned a lot, we have a great deal to learn still. So very excited about the years ahead.
Yeah, Tyler, I'm reminded that whenever we really lean into a topic and begin to study it seriously, we realize how little we know. And I'm hearing an echo of Sir John Templeton and his humility and sense that the more we learn, the more we really find aspects of our world quite mysterious and worth digging into further. And so, Tim, in light of that, how can science help us further explore the mysteries that are coming up as we begin to try to make sense of multiple data sets? And I'm immediately thinking back to this conversation we started about pre-registration. And I remember your colleague at the center, Brian, giving a presentation a few years ago where he said, you know, if you look at studies that were not pre-registered, they almost always support the hypotheses. And if you look at studies where they pre-register the hypotheses, the number's much lower. I think it's like half or something to that effect. And so there is a sense that what's going on without pre-registration is one, we're extremely lucky, which seems unlikely. Two, we might change our hypotheses after the fact. Once we start crunching the numbers, we start fishing around, going on a fishing expedition. Or three, we just torture the data until they confess. And so those options are not great for public confidence in science. So getting back to the question, one of the unique features of the Global Flourishing Study is that researchers can gain access to the data by pre-registering their studies. So you get the data for free, but there's a catch. You have to practice open science principles. Why is pre-registration so important? And do we know how many researchers are choosing this route?
That's a great question. Well, you answered why it's important. I think you just summed it up really nicely. So I'll try a different tactic to talk about why it's important. So these are great results we saw. It got distilled into a single number. Countries at the single number has a lot of work. It's a lot of data that went from where the data originated from the survey all the way up to that. And they can share your code, and it's wonderful to have it. But there is some hypothesis. There's a question that was the basis of the whole thing. There was a rationalization to do it that way. It's important to do that before you see the outcome. That's how we have confidence in the outcome. We do not control what we find. We only control what we can ask and how we go about that question. So I think that's why it's important, because the alternative paths you had that you just laid out, torturing the data included, right? It's too tempting to do that. It doesn't mean that it's not okay to explore the data. It's just that's what you're doing at that point. And so this is why I think for a project like this, it's really crucial. And not, again, just for the results you've seen, but for anyone who wants to access this data, it's just saying, what are your intentions? Just state your assumption. What are you trying to do? What is the question you're asking? How do you propose going about it? That allows that intellectual humility, because we don't always know, right? And if we did, we wouldn't be asking the question. So since we don't know and we're trying to figure this out, state what that is up front. That's actually, when you ask the question of Tyler, what's the most surprising thing? That gives that validity in my mind, because you can say, my assumptions were this, I pre-registered it. That's not what I thought. I got something different. And that's how we move forward in science. That's why I think it's very crucial.
Great, thank you. Well, I know we are at time, and I'd like to thank the panelists for their generous sharing today. Thank you all. And invite Riyadh to come up, and the second panel can take the stage. Thank you both. Thanks. Yeah.
We humans have been very busy mapping the expanse of the world, from mountaintops to ocean depth. and every creature, plant, and element along the way. We've mapped the planets and the stars, even the code to human life. We are a curious bunch, which brings us to that one rare thing that remains surprisingly unmapped. The question, what causes human flourishing? What exactly is it that moves human beings to contentment, vitality, hope, good character, mental health, and fruitful relationships? Is there a set of researchable, repeatable waypoints that chart humanity's course to our very best selves? The Global Flourishing Study is a research initiative whose ultimate goal is to map that very mystery, to find pathways to the causes of flourishing, as well as obstacles that keep us from flourishing, across diverse countries, cultures, beliefs, income levels, and vocations. The Global Flourishing Study is a 5-year longitudinal study of over 200,000 participants in 22 countries. It's engaging dozens of leading sociologists, philosophers, theologians, psychologists, epidemiologists, historians, and economists. By putting deep empirical data behind questions we all care about, the Global Flourishing Study is not just charting the hows and whys of human flourishing, it's mapping the very mystery of humanity. Follow the research at globalflourishingstudy.com.
Here we are. Welcome to panel 2. How are we doing? Wonderful. My name is Riada Akio. I'm Senior Communications Consultant for Gallup, and I'm stepping in for our Managing Director, who we keep in our thoughts because of family emergency. And I've had the privilege to work with so many partners, friends, and colleagues on bringing this event to life, so I'm truly excited to see how it's shaping up. We've heard, we've heard who they are, but Byron Johnson, Professor and Director at Institute for Studies of Religion, Institute for Global Human Flourishing at Baylor University, Eleanor Allen, CEO of the World Flourishing Organization, Mohammed, Senior Program Officer at the Fetzer Institute. It's an honor to be here with you today. So let's just dive in. This is a second panel. We've heard about the science. I'm going to start with you, Byron. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, great. The Global Flourishing Study uses multidimensional measures of well-being. We've heard a little bit about relationships, character, and those different dimensions, but I want to ask you, which of those do you think that we underestimate most in public discourse, and why?
Well, I'm going to pick the relationships angle. You've heard it discussed earlier in panel 1, and I think the findings that Tyler mentioned about young people struggling across the world, this is also not news to us because we knew already from other studies that young people are struggling, but it's not really just the young. John Clifton, the CEO of Gallup, couldn't be here today. Jim is here, and so good to be with you, Jim. But John wrote a book a couple years ago called The Blind Spot, and it's about how the global rise of unhappiness has caught so many leaders off guard. And, you know, people struggling with all kinds of issues, anger, stress, worry, pain. And a part of this is because they're isolated. And the 2023 Surgeon General report was on this very topic of the epidemic of isolation. And it's particularly true among young people. So just the idea of connectedness, something this simple, I think, is a big part of some of the struggles that we're seeing. Bob Putnam was talking about this in the year 2000 when he wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And the concern for social capital, the decline in social capital. What is social capital? Well, it's largely the issue of trustworthiness in relationships, reciprocal relationships. So I just think that the issue of relationships is phenomenally important. I do think it's something that doesn't take rocket science to think we could address this issue. And the data seem to be pretty clear. So I think this issue of connection, close relationships, it's really important. I don't think you can flourish in isolation.
And highlighting that social connection just shows how rich and layered flourishing and well-being is. Building on that, Mohammed, I'm going to turn to you. Many research that we know deal with what's wrong, disease, dysfunction. This study asks what contributes to a life well lived. Why do you think it's essential that we study flourishing and not just its absence?
Well, the simple answer is that there is...
You got a simple answer?
Well, sometimes. There's a lot more that could go right than what could go wrong. We have a little bit of a bias as human beings. We focus on the negatives and fear and so forth. And I'll say why even human flourishing is not adequate. Maybe we have to think beyond that. You can remind me later at the end of this if I forget to mention that. My simple comparison is having worked in that industry for a little bit, the idea of accessibility and universal design. One of the companies that mastered universal design well is Apple. Apple didn't look for particular, in their design process, they didn't look for particular accessibility issues. Why not make it a human universal issue and design for that, which reduces stigma. For example, mental health, I think many of us have a problem acknowledging mental problem and seeking help because there's a little bit of stigma attached to that. But if it were framed within the framework of something like human flourishing, that's something that we all need, a potential that we want to realize, then it would not be an issue. It would be just part of the other things that I do, a suite of things that I do. And you can also extrapolate that to, for example, peace. Peace is not just the absence of war. Peace is a mindset. It's a state of being. You can also compare that to prayer. Some people pray only when there is a problem or an imminent danger and so forth, and probably forget about it. For other people, it's a relational thing. It's who they are, and they do it regularly. I'm not trying to be judgmental about prayer, but our approach to it, whether it's a mindset, a worldview, or it is a solution to a temporary problem. And I'll come back to why I think we should go even beyond human flourishing, because still, don't you think human flourishing is human-centric and anthropocentric? Because there's a lot more to life than just humans.
Well, that's one beautiful way to frame why flourishing deserves center stage and all the explorations that we can go from there. Eleanor, the Global Flourishing Study has generated some of the most comprehensive data sets collected on the topic of human flourishing. And you are someone who has led various organizations focusing on translating science to practice. So I'd like to ask you what insights from this wave one of data feel the most immediately applicable considering your work for World Flourishing Organization?
Thanks, Riyada. And I'm so excited to see the results of the study because they're definitely applicable to what we're doing at the World Flourishing Organization. We're taking the research and applying it to life, in our case, workplace flourishing. So we've been working in workplace flourishing, and our mission is to support organizations that lead with purpose, that want to turn insights into impact, and that measure what matters. So basing this on flourishing, think about culture plus psychological safety, and then add in all the other dimensions, because all the 6 dimensions are also, you could just say, at work. So the connection to people, the happiness, the health, the purpose is really important, and that security, financial, are they making a living wage, material? So all of this comes here to the workplace. And so when I think of the 6 dimensions, I had a visual of a prism. You know, you have a prism and you put it in the sunlight and the colors come out. I feel like when you get that prism just right and that rainbow comes out, that's the moment of flourishing. But it's hard to get it all the time. So in the workplace, it's especially complicated because we have all these human dynamics and interactions. So at the World Flourishing Organization, we really believe in then having it simple, science-backed, and be able to be scalable. My background's engineering and science, so I love all of this. And I really appreciate you coming out with the study now because this is the perfect timing for us and for the world. So we've been working on this, and I feel like we just got a big tailwind because of all these amazing papers that have been published, and really gives the credibility and start socializing that flourishing is all-encompassing. It's a life well lived and at work. And specifically in wave 1, what I really loved was the global aspect and the findings of the complexities of flourishing, but also the intergenerational aspect. We find those in the workplace, no matter what country we're working in. And I look at my data, where's my little point? Oh, US, older. Oh yeah, actually, I feel like I have been more flourishing as my life has gone on. I have 2 kids that are Gen Z. One is here with us today, and they're the least flourishing generation here in the US. So, you know, what can I do about that and help bring each generation along, especially at work? So I think the intergenerational aspect at work is really important. And also just having people understand that it's very difficult to change human behavior and very complex. And we have 6 dimensions we're talking about today, but people don't generally like to change. And in the US especially, I would say we're comfortable now with remote working. As Byron mentioned, this is not good for work. We know we're becoming more disengaged from the workplace. So I think explicitly finding ways to connect us and be other humans. I'm a great introvert. I like to work at home. But a couple weeks ago, I was with my team for a whole week. We were in Asia working on flourishing. Oh my gosh, my flourishing bucket is like overflowing. Just so much got done, and it was so much more inspiring. And we are still wired to be with each other, even though technology is taking off. We don't evolve that quickly. So I'm really grateful for the wave 1, the findings that we can apply directly to the workplace as we work on our tools and methodologies.
No, that's so exciting that the study and the data is already shaping up what's happening on the ground. Speaking of that, Byron, you mentioned social connections. We've spoken about several dimensions in the first panel as well. I'd like to ask you, considering that I know how much you travel, how much you interact, I want to ask you about storytelling, and you're a wonderful storyteller, but how has that and those lived experiences and the people that you interact with influenced and shaped your understanding of human flourishing?
Well, the Global Flourishing Study is essentially a 22-minute interview. And some of you are thinking, that's really short. But there is this issue of fatigue. We can't talk to people on the phone, let's say, for an hour. We'll lose them. So there's that sweet spot. But what can you accomplish in 22 minutes? Not all that you'd like to accomplish. You can't ask all the questions you'd like to ask. One of the painful things Tyler and I had to go through with the development of the questionnaire was we kept being told, you have to cut it in half. And it was just like you're losing one of your children, you know. Oh, that one's gone. And then they would come back and say, we have to cut it again. And that was just so painful. And even now, I'm feeling a little trauma, just going back. But we would love to have the luxury of talking to people for much longer periods of time. And so in my spare time, I visit communities and do interviews. And one of these communities is a little town called Trilith outside of Atlanta, which is a community, you ready for this, designed on the domains of human flourishing. And so when I heard about Trilith, I thought I have to go there and see this place. And it is idyllic. So when you go there, you think, I have to move here. It is serene, it's beautiful, it's a planned community, but it's designed so that people are interacting with each other. You have to bump into people. And one of the guys I interviewed is a recovering addict. And he said, I moved here, and after I moved here, I thought, what have I done? I have to bump into everybody on the streets. I don't really want to do that. And of course, now he's kind of known as the mayor of the city. That's his nickname, because you'll always see him on the street talking to people at Trilith. And so you sit down and spend an hour talking with someone, and then you begin to get insights of how his own recovery is benefited by being in the company of people that he lives next to. And I've seen this over and over. Another person at Trilith said to me, how can I flourish if my neighbor's not flourishing? And this is at the heart of flourishing. Flourishing is an individual thing, but it's also a communal thing. And so you have this idyllic community of Trilith, and then you have the Mississippi State Penitentiary, where I love to hang out. My middle name is 5 to 10. And so I go to the Mississippi State Penitentiary about once a month and hang out with prisoners. It's a maximum security prison. And I do have the chance to interview them repeatedly. And I was talking to someone on death row recently, and he's been on death row for decades. And he leads a congregation on death row. It's called the Dog Pen Church, because when they used to let them out for 1 hour a day, they would be in these cages that had formerly been used for dogs. And so I said to him, every time I see you, you just have a smile on your face. How is that? And he said, well, everybody has a death sentence. You're born with one. He said, so I discovered that a long time ago. And he goes, I have found life here in this place. And so he goes, I have meaning, I have purpose. And so he just checked all the domains of flourishing, not so much the financial security one. But this is a person that's waiting in execution. And so I think these kinds of things that I'm hearing on death row are the same kinds of things actually that I was hearing in Trilith when I was talking to people that were going through cancer. So flourishing is not the absence of suffering. Indeed, people can flourish through suffering. And so unfortunately, this is one of the limitations of the Global Flourishing Study, is that we don't have that kind of rich qualitative time to do that. But don't think Tyler and I are not talking about ways to figure that one out. Stay tuned to that.
I told you Byron is a great storyteller, but I've seen some of the visual output and it brought tears to my eyes. It's incredibly moving and beautiful to hear how the data complements what you're seeing from lived experiences. Speaking of all these efforts that are going on the ground, Eleanor, you scratched the surface of some new actions and tools, but I want to ask you about potentially blind spots that you're seeing or that you have seen, or some challenges and obstacles for organizations in getting to that understanding of why this is necessary.
There's so many blind spots as we have as humans. Speaking from my own personal experience, being in engineering for many years and going into management and being a CEO for many years, it's way harder to manage and communicate with people than do my engineering calculations. And then trying to get feedback, necessarily, feedback's a gift, right? But, I don't really want that negative feedback, just give me the good stuff. But listening and learning and being self-aware and becoming a leader who's truly gets it. And so thinking about blind spots in the workplace, I see them as two ways. There's the foundational blind spots and the systemic. Foundational is like having goals and a mission and vision, but the employees are like, I don't know how I connect to that. Like, what's in it for me? Like, why would I do those things? I just do my work and it doesn't connect to any of these goals, and sort of like a dissociation. And, that leads to not being as productive as you could be, and not loving your job as much as you can do, not feeling as valued or having purpose or influence and agency. And then on the more systemic side, again, reflecting personal experience as a CEO, is like, I want to have a great culture. I want to make this amazing place. why isn't it that way? Okay, well, it all rolls up to me. So what else can I do, or what am I not doing? It's a lot about, okay, figure out what you want to be. You have your beliefs, you be authentic. And then how do you inspire your people? And how do you actually listen and understand what they need? And reducing that mismatch between what employees need and having them feel heard and acknowledged. And then you can't give them everything, but there is some like, okay, I get it. We can make those adjustments. That feels pretty good. I was actually had something to contribute and I had to change my organization. That takes time, and that takes changing routines, and that takes new ideas, and all these things are just like going against the momentum of the habits and behaviors and norms at work. But in my experience, having failed so many times, the successes I did find is when I really leaned in, was really vulnerable, and said, help me understand what we need to do differently and what can I do differently. And I think that's really important when making a flourishing workplace, because here we have 6 dimensions. It's not just 1 or 2 things. It's a lot. But you know what? When you get it right, it feels really good. And just working with organizations and with leadership teams, it's like the things you don't learn in business school or on the job, or the science and the reasons we behave that way. So our tools and methodologies, many have been informed by the work here from Global Flourishing Study in Baylor and Harvard, are really about why humans behave the way they do. And then how do you get the results? As the employees, how do you know what your role is? Because it's not all management's fault to solve every problem. There are things you can do. Then have the roll-up of the organization. And like, this is where you're flourishing, striving to flourish, and where you're actually really struggling as an organization, setting that blueprint and roadmap, and then learning new methods to have a different culture in the workplace. So I'm appreciative for all this data, because it's super helpful to help explain these things.
And is there already a tool of some sort that you're thinking of that's practicable? It's obvious that you're committed to the research. How is that thinking going?
Yes. So we have a hierarchy of tools depending on what people want to gauge. One is at the organizational level. So it's like the organizational flourishing framework, and recognizing organizations in 5 areas, like the foundational policies and practices, listening, learning, achieving, and setting that inspiration, and really functioning at a higher level. So that's only at the organization would provide that information. Then we have an executive blueprint, we're calling it, really getting executive teams to understand all these things we're talking about here, and leading the way for the organizations and creating their own blueprint, and then figuring out how to help them implement it. And then on the employee level, one that's coming out of the 12 questions here from the Global Flourishing Study and from Harvard, applying them to the workplace. So a workplace Flourishing at Work Index, a very simple 5-minute survey that can be done individually as employees and roll up to the organization. And then if you really love it, we have a 20-minute one that is like the gold standard for covering all 6 dimensions, very in-depth, and 120 drivers. So organization down to employees. But what's really a differentiator we are learning is the employees getting their own feedback and feeling like, oh my gosh, this is me. This is what I can do. And opening the conversation between the management team and the employees.
Well, it's obvious that there is momentum across so many domains, and I'm so excited to introduce you to some of my Gallup colleagues and leaders from workplace or Gallup, considering everything that's happening across various streams. Byron, I want to turn to you and hear a little bit more about communities of practice. Tell us how they are leading this flourishing movement in the country so far.
Sure. Well, in the last panel, Dr. Matt Lee, if he doesn't make it in academics, he can make it as a moderator. I can tell you that. No, Matt is incredible, and he leads the Flourishing Network at Harvard, and started a community of practice there. These are like-minded people from different sectors, and it started with a handful of people, and it's just mushroomed. Every time they would meet, they would have more people that would come. And these are people that are interested in transforming their communities, their work environments, their businesses, et cetera. And so these communities of practice are just an applied way in which you can put all the domains of flourishing into practice. I'm excited that Baylor is going to become a flourishing campus. It's just going to be baked into the DNA, and this new institute will be that will be one of the missions of the institute itself. So I think communities of practice are just a tangible way of doing something now. I think sometimes people are always a little nervous about a first step. And I remember Matt Lee and I were doing interviews in Trilith, and one of the women that he was interviewing said, "I'd like to start a community of practice here." And so, once you hear about it, then people are energized by that. But again, it's this interdisciplinary nature of bringing people that don't typically come together, to bring them together. That's what's so cool about the Global Flourishing Study. It's 50 scholars from all these different disciplines. We speak different languages, but we really have, in fact, become a community of practice, our team. And that's why we've been able to produce all these papers. And the thing that's so exciting, of course, is that there's another whole wave of papers coming. This is just the beginning. Over the next few weeks and months, you will see many, many more papers. But I do think that communities of practice is something that can go global. We would like to see that be kind of the anchor for a movement, whether it's in business, in politics, government, it doesn't matter. It works just about anywhere.
It's really difficult to keep up with all the announcements that are amazing today, from the new institute, from Baylor becoming a flourishing universities. Speaking about this idea of collective action becoming a vital part of the ecosystem, Mohammed, you and your institution have supported this project from the beginning. So let's speak a little bit about the role of philanthropy. What do you think, obviously, and Chris, you spoke a little bit about it, in terms of enabling mammoth projects like this, and why is that important?
Well, I would like to believe that philanthropy is about the love of humanity. And if it's about the love of humanity, human flourishing is a natural fit. And philanthropy can play a significant role in advancing human flourishing. One, because of the size. There are over 90,000 foundations in the United States alone, with a combined asset of $1.5 trillion. That's a lot of resources available, a lot of power that can be used for something like human flourishing. The other one is the sort of long time horizon of foundations. They have a mission. Most of them have missions that go, some of them can go in the hundreds of years, like my own organization, the Fetzer Institute. So they have these long vision, a long-term horizon in what they do. The other thing is risk tolerance. Even though something like this is amazing and you have published so many papers, congratulations, by the way, it's not cheap. And it's early stage. Early stage requires a leap of faith and risk taking. And philanthropy can play a role in that. And one of the key contributions of philanthropy is taking risks and innovating and tolerating failure, learning from failure, and then, scaling successful initiatives. And the other thing is there's flexibility, better flexibility in philanthropy. Not necessarily all foundations or philanthropists are flexible, but there's better flexibility, better risk tolerance, and this long-term vision. And the very idea of philanthropy itself, which is about I'd like to believe may not apply to everyone, but it's about the love of humanity. So it's, in that sense, it's a natural fit. Even though $1.5 trillion looks like a lot of money, it's probably not a lot considering we have about 8 billion people on the planet, but it can at least be sort of a seed funding, an installment on that vision to bring about human flourishing globally. So And philanthropy has already played a significant role in reducing hunger, advancing human rights, and so forth. If you look at the roles played by the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, Templeton Foundation, the Knight Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and so forth, they have already played that role. This would be a natural fit. The challenge would be to, you need to have solid evidence that this has potential in order to bring that to the foundation. So that part of it can be challenging, but I believe philanthropy can play a big role in advancing human flourishing.
Thank you for reminding us how collaboration powers movements like this and the essential role of philanthropy in that. I have time for 2 more questions, so I'll pose one quick to Eleanor and Byron before we get to short Q&A and hope that conversation continues at our reception. Eleanor, a short one for you. Of course, it's very difficult to ask you about one insight. So pick your top one or something that you would want the leaders that you interact with to take away from this study as you continue your conversations.
My one takeaway is the multidimensionality and how important that is to understand all the dimensions. And again, I'm speaking from the workplace perspective. When we can get this right, it's a huge return on investment that we can make, because if we have less turnover and we have more engaged people and higher productivity, everyone benefits, employees and employers. And we have a term that we use called flourishing as an asset on your balance sheet. It is, because we can we can calculate the times saved by increasing your flourishing and therefore the money saved. So it's a real deal. And we also, if you flip that over, the cost of inaction, the one you're leaving on the table by just status quo doing what you're doing. So embrace flourishing in all the dimensions and you'll benefit from that. Everyone benefits. Excuse me.
Thank you for sharing that vision. And I want to ask Byron the last question. Looking at longer horizon, right? We're here speaking about the wave 1 data. We know the wave 2 is out now. Our researchers are galvanizing to start getting in that information. I think we heard from Tyler about some early insights, but I want to ask you, is there something that surprised you from what you saw that you would like to share here?
I'll go a little bit of a different direction in terms of instead of a finding, one of the things that we wondered about, how many people would stay in the study? It's a longitudinal study, and we don't have a frame of reference because there hasn't been a global study. So would we lose all of them? So that year 2, we don't have anybody to talk to? We didn't know. And even our genius colleagues at Gallup said it is going to be a guessing game. And, thank you, Tyler. Tyler just shot me sign language. Zach Ritter, he's in California. He just had a child, he and his wife. Congratulations to you all. And Zach has been enormous, Jim. I don't know what we would have done without him as our point person from Gallup. Just a dream. But we were able to retain over 62% of our sample for wave 2. And it's an astonishing thing. Thank you to Gallup, too, for pushing so hard. You know, you've pushed us pretty hard, Riyadh, preparing for this event. And we pushed Gallup pretty hard, too, because we really needed to get as many people as we could to retain. And now we're in the field for wave 3, just so you know. And we hope with wave 3, we will have, in fact, a group that will stick with us indefinitely. That's what we're really hopeful for. So one of the surprising things to me was we hit a higher mark than I thought we were going to hit. I would have been okay with 50%. I never told Jim and John that, but I would have been okay with it. And but we did a lot better, which just gives us so much more statistical power when we're doing these studies. So that's a finding that you didn't probably expect, that I would say.
Well, I'm going to have you on stage here. If not next year, then considering the momentum building, I wouldn't be surprised if we're here even before. But thank you, Byron. I know that we worked so hard on bringing this event to life, and we joked we're going to have withdrawal afterwards because we interacted so intensely with everyone. I would like to offer, my colleagues will be here. I have time just for 2 or 3 questions, and I really thank you for your understanding. I invite you to interact with our speakers and continue the conversation at the reception. So, Annie, we have 1 question here, 1 here, and it's so hard. One of you ladies, let's go with you.
Hi, I'm Rohan. Thank you so much. This has been such an energizing conversation. Took so many notes. My question is for the panel. The short question is, how can we counteract the role of media in human languishing? Because the term that has been spoken about the most is religious participation. And if you think about what Mary Oliver said, attention is the beginning of devotion. And Gen Z is now devoted to a very nihilistic form of media. And how do we counteract that?
Byron, would you like to take that? At least from your lived experience in being on the ground.
Thank you for that easy question. So appreciate it. We need to figure out creative ways to reach people. And you mentioned the term storytelling. We have to do a better job. We're so thrilled to be in Nature and the Nature portfolio of journals because it means a lot on the academic side, and it will mean ultimately a lot on the policy side for us to be in those journals. But we have to start doing documentaries, YouTube videos. And so we've just begun to experiment. I just finished a 27-minute documentary of these guys that I was telling you about on death row. And I hope that things like this will be a tool for us to think more creatively about how to use the visual arts, for example. And Matt Lee has written a wonderful report that he just finished last night at midnight that is what we call a public-facing report from Wave 1 findings that has a lot of artwork in it about flourishing. And we think that it will be very compelling to the right kinds of people. So we need help. We're academics, we're pathetic, but that's why these communities of practice are so important, because we all have our own blind spots, just like we do with flourishing. And so thank you for the question. We're not happy about some of the data, especially with young people, but how can we use it and how can we communicate more effectively? We want to learn with you. And so we look forward to being in dialogue with you to help us figure out the answer to the very question you just asked.
Byron may have announced just something in his answer, if you caught that, but everything that's coming up in terms of visual outputs that you're planning, so that's very exciting. Alyssa, can we have 1 microphone here for the lady in the first row, please? Oh, you're going, okay, no problem. Go ahead.
I'm happy to pass it forward.
All good.
Cool. Hi.
You stand up.
Oh, yes, I'll stand up. Hi, I'm Sydney. Hopefully studying this field of work in grad school in some near future, but this has been really phenomenal and informational. I have a question about just how you're defining flourishing. I think it's been really hard to make it tangible. The 6 dimensions feel really universally applicable, but I think, as you guys mentioned, through the data, there has been some, differentiation of how different countries and cultures prioritize different dimensions of the entire circle. So I'm assuming you measured them all in 6 even squares, right? But could you see a future in which you would take the country's prioritization or prioritization of one dimension and weigh that more in how you measure their flourishing?
Yeah.
Let me know if that.
Yeah, great question. And maybe this is the best answer for that question. Tyler alluded to this earlier. We have a special issue of the International Journal of Wellbeing that will feature 22 papers, 1 on each of the countries, where we'll do a much deeper dive in those countries, where we will try to unpack things that we really couldn't when you're trying to meta-analyze across all these countries. And these are projects that are led by people in these countries themselves. So you raise a great point. We do want to do all that you've just described, and this is outside of the special collection. So there are also other projects underway outside of the special collection. So stay tuned. More to come as we try to unpack that together with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And one last lady, the first row.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Rachel Medefend, and I would like to ask a prying personal question. I'm just so grateful for this research. It's been profound in my own work, and I serve in the space of orphans and vulnerable children, both globally and also in the US context. And there's such an emphasis upon what's gone wrong, and both the questions and the solutions are framed within that framework. And this really seems to be taking a different approach, one that's looking at positive avenues for growth, ingredients for health, and that's so exciting to me. Because there's so much emphasis on the mental health crisis in our day and the questions, again, being in the same direction, when you think about your own children or say your grandchildren or the children that are dearest to you, and you think, given what you've learned, what would you specifically apply for your children? I would just love to know what you would genuinely say in that regard.
I saw you looking at Tyler, but I'll take it. I go back to the relationships. And in this study, we asked questions about, reflect back to when you were 12 years old. And we want to ask you a series of questions. And a number of those questions dealt with their relationship between them as a 12-year-old and their parent. And we find those to be really compelling. It's just this idea that a relationship with a parent as a young person is extremely predictive of good outcomes as an adult. And so for me, I now have grandkids, and my wife and I deeply pour into our grandkids. We want to build those relationships. And so I think that relationships with your children, with your grandchildren, with your neighbors, these are things that seem simple, but sometimes in our hurried world, we take for granted or don't prioritize. So I think there's so many exciting bits of news in the data, just like this, that those relationships pay off in the end. Can I add to that?
Just a little,
Of course.
just a quick add on that, and then Mohammed. So, and my son is here. He can hold me honest to this. But the way I was raised was like, keep it inside. Don't share your problems. Go to your room and cry there. We don't want to see, we don't want to see any of that. And going into work, also an engineer, is very formal and very stoic, right? So this was the way I was trained. And then, there came to a point where it didn't serve me well anymore. And I started doing a lot of work on myself and, letting go of baggage that I've been dragging around. It was holding me back. I wasn't able to have the relationships I wanted at work and with my family. And so what I've been trying to do as a mother to my kids is like, hey, don't carry that baggage around. Let's talk through it. It doesn't need to be with me, but let go of things that are weighting you down, and keep agile and be able to take on life as it comes, because otherwise it just gets too much and it can lead to really difficult situations.
I think I have 3 young children. I believe having some kind of Sunday school is very important. However you define it, it could be a Friday school, Saturday school, some kind of time set aside to talk about not grades and accomplishments, but about the meaning of life and relationships and so forth, and plenty of time for play. Our children don't have time for play. They are overscheduled, and we are focusing on their accomplishments. I think they need to play and be humans and have some kind of Sunday school kind of time set aside to talk about the meaning of life and purpose and other things.
Well, thank you everyone so much, to our incredible panelists, to all of our partners, all of you online. This is just the beginning, as we said, so we invite you to visit our resources online. Stay tuned for more information. globalflourishingstudy.com will have all updates, and we welcome you to join the speakers and other registrants in the atrium of our great hall. Thank you so much.